It across the ring. On my left, fighting out of the blue corner.
He weighed in at 227.2 pounds. He holds a near-perfect professional record of 10 victories, opposite just 1 defeat, with 7 of those wins coming by way of knockout.
For someone,
it's just wild to see after how that first round went.
Nice left hook
there. The right hand. Do not slip to your left on the jab.
It's just a matter of time. He's getting broke down.
Whoa.
That's a good hook he landed on. Oh.
Overhand right.
A minute 15 seconds away from the midpoint of this fight, and now Davis trying to...
Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis in 2025 was pure chaos inside the ring. The undefeated knockout king went head-to-head with the YouTube villain in a brutal, shocking, and unforgettable showdown. Did Jake Paul achieve the impossible? Or did Tank Davis expose him in the most violent way possible? On paper, this was a fight that should never have been sanctioned, a cruiserweight walking around at over 200 pounds against a lightweight champion who built his legacy at 135. The size difference alone made regulators in Atlanta halt the original deal, unwilling to take the risk. But boxing doesn't follow logic, it thrives on spectacle. That's why the bout moved to Miami's Casa Center, a city that lives off chaos and entertainment. What unfolded wasn't just a boxing match. It was the biggest mismatch in recent history turned into a global event. Netflix saw the opportunity, jumped in, and marketed it as the Super Bowl of combat sports. And it worked. Millions tuned in, not just to see punches thrown, but to witness what happens when a YouTuber-turned-brawler collides with one of boxing's most feared knockout artists. It wasn't about belts or rankings. It was about history. The weight gap wasn't just a storyline, it was a storm. Jake Paul, the problem child, carried a frame that dwarfed Tank Davis, taller, heavier, with a longer reach. On paper, it was David versus Goliath. But here's the twist, Goliath wasn't the natural-born fighter. Jake Paul was the outsider, the disruptor, the wild card who built his name by knocking out opponents the boxing world dismissed. Gervonta Davis was the David with dynamite in his fists. 24 wins, 23 by knockout, undefeated and feared across 3 divisions. This clash wasn't about fairness. It was about what happens when hype meets skill. The fight didn't happen overnight. Its roots go back years, fueled by constant trash talk. 4 years earlier, when Jake Paul called out Canelo Alvarez, a move many mocked, Gervonta Davis chimed in, saying he'd beat the brakes off Jake Paul. It was a quick jab online, but Jake didn't let it slide. He mocked Davis's height, turned him into a meme, and used his massive following to spin the insult into hype. Tank dismissed Paul as a fake boxer, the same criticism Paul had faced from day one. But Jake turned every insult into motivation. The more the boxing world doubted him, the louder his fans rallied behind him. That growing pressure made it impossible for Davis to ignore. The rivalry escalated after Jake Paul shocked the world by defeating Mike Tyson. What made this matchup even more fascinating was how different the two men were. Jake Paul, loud, brash, always selling the show. Tank Davis, quiet, cold, and deadly, letting his fists speak for him. When Tank promised to put Paul to sleep, it wasn't talk. It was a guarantee backed by years of knockouts. That's what made the fight inevitable. It wasn't just 2 fighters, it was 2 worlds colliding. Jake Paul, boxing's most watched disruptor, stepped up to face a pound-for-pound star who had nothing to prove but everything to lose. The weight gap, the trash talk, and the Tyson fight all built the tension to a boiling point. By the time fight night arrived, the world was watching. The world wasn't just watching, it was holding its breath. And that's how a fight that never should have happened did. Jake Paul's rise in boxing has been nothing short of outrageous. This was a guy who started out as a prankster on YouTube, making wild videos for clicks, and somehow ended up sharing the ring with one of the most feared names in combat sports history, Mike Tyson. And not only sharing it, but winning. Now, was Tyson 58 years old at the time? Yes. Did he look like the same Iron Mike, who used to send heavyweights into early retirement? Absolutely not. But still, beating Tyson, even a late career version, gave Jake Paul a golden ticket. He turned what should have been a gimmick into what he called the defining win of my career. Critics didn't buy it. They called the Tyson fight a robbery, said Tyson looked old, tired, and had no business being in the ring with a 20-something powerhouse. Eddie Hearn flat out called the whole thing an insult. But here's the thing, love it or hate it, people couldn't stop talking about it. And Jake Paul knew exactly how to spin that noise. For him, it wasn't about Tyson's age. It was about beating a legend, stealing headlines, and rewriting his place in boxing history. The reaction was pure chaos. Colby Covington came swinging with insults, calling Jake soft and not a real boxer. Claressa Shields mocked his entire approach, calling it nothing but chaos and hustle. Francis Ngannou joked about slapping Jake around to humble him. And Andre Ward, the retired great, told Jake straight up, "Fight a real contender if you want to prove yourself." Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a hot take. But Jake flipped the script. Instead of getting buried by criticism, he used it as fuel. Every insult became a headline. Every tweet became a promo. And suddenly, Jake Paul wasn't just a YouTuber clowning around in boxing. He was a name real champions had to acknowledge. Love him or hate him, he created conversations the sport hadn't seen in years. On the other side of the ring stood a man who didn't need marketing, clickbait, or trash talk to build his name, Gervonta, Tank Davis. If Jake was all noise and chaos, Tank was silence before the storm. The man whose fists did the talking. Before stepping in with Paul, Tank's record was flawless. 24 wins, 0 losses, 23 knockouts. That wasn't dominance, it was destruction. Nearly every man who faced him ended up unconscious or broken. Tank didn't fight to win rounds, he fought to end nights early. His story was built on grit. Born in Baltimore, raised in hardship, he was molded by struggle. Boxing wasn't just a sport for Tank Davis, it was survival. By the time he turned professional, he carried that hunger into every fight. What made him stand out even more was how he became Atlanta's adopted son. The city embraced him, and in return, Tank gave them highlight after highlight, knockout after knockout, until he became a cult hero in the sport. And it wasn't just about his record, it was how he won. He wasn't a volume puncher or a guy who peppered opponents with jabs. Tank was a hunter, patient, precise, and explosive. One clean shot, and it was lights out. That kind of power at 135 pounds is terrifying. Fans didn't just respect him, they feared for anyone who stood across the ring. That's why heading into this fight, most of the boxing world believed Jake Paul was walking into a trap he couldn't escape. Sure, Jake had beaten names like Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva, Nate Diaz, and even Mike Tyson. But Tank wasn't an aging MMA fighter or a retired legend. He violently. No YouTube fame, no Netflix promotion, no size advantage could save him once Tank found his mark. This was supposed to be the fight that humbled him, the one that reminded everyone boxing is built on skill, timing, and talent, not marketing. The contrast between the two couldn't have been sharper. Jake Paul, the loud disruptor with millions of followers, selling fig and thrived on attention, the other on destruction. Put that combination in one ring, and you don't just get a fight, you get a storm the whole world can't look away from. That's why this matchup mattered. It wasn't just height versus skill or size versus speed. It was everything boxing fans argue about rolled into one night. Legacy versus clout, tradition versus disruption, respect versus chaos. By fight night, nobody cared about the weight difference, or whether Jake deserved to be there. All that mattered was one question: could Jake Paul survive Tank Davis's fists? Or was Tank about to do what he'd done to nearly everyone else, shut the lights off in brutal fashion? The stakes were sky high. And what happened next was even crazier than anyone expected. Fight week in Miami was madness. The city turned into a carnival, with Netflix hyping the event like it was a new hit series. Billboards lit up every corner, countdown clocks ticked on giant screens, and reporters swarmed both camps. Every press conference felt like a circus. Jake Paul leaned fully into his villain role, mocking Tank's height, even crouching down in front of him and laughing to his face. Tank didn't flinch. He stared him down and promised coldly, "I'm putting you in a body bag." The crowd gasped. The headlines wrote themselves. The face-offs were nuclear. Every time they stood nose to chest, because, truth be told, Tank barely reached Jake's chin. The contrast was electric. Experts couldn't agree. Some said Tank was risking everything fighting a man nearly 70 pounds heavier, while others believed this was the perfect moment to expose Jake once and for all. Then came the ring walks. Gervonta Davis entered first, slow, calm, hoodie up, no theatrics. Just ice in his veins. His music shook the arena, but his face never changed. He wasn't there to perform. He was there to destroy. Then came Jake Paul's entrance, pure spectacle. Pyro blasting, dancers on stage, a custom-themed song, the works. He strutted out grinning, arms wide, soaking in the boos and cheers alike. Love him or hate him, every camera was locked on him. Underneath all the lights and noise, one truth filled the arena. This was going to be either a miracle or a massacre. The bell rang. Round 1. Tank came out like a man with zero interest in able to connect cleanly. Tank's speed shocked everyone, especially Jake. Within seconds, Jake's face showed frustration, like he'd underestimated just how quick Tank was. By the end of the first round, Tank had landed several sharp left hands, not enough to hurt, but enough to send a message. Size doesn't matter if you can't catch me. Round 2 was more of the same. Tank slipping, weaving, and countering with precision. Jake's jab looked stiff, robotic next to Tank's rhythm. Every time Jake tried to find range, Tank exploded with combinations, tagged him, and vanished. But things started to shift in rounds 3 and 4. Jake leaned into his biggest weapon, his size. He slowed the pace, cut the ring off, and began pressing Tank against the ropes. For the first time, Tank couldn't dance freely and had to fight inside. Jake dug into the body with thudding shots that echoed through the arena. Tank absorbed them, but his movements slowed ever so slightly. Jake lacked Tank's speed, but those punches carried raw, dangerous power. Round 5 sparked. Round 5 brought controversy. Jake landed what looked like a knockdown, a clean right hand that sent Tank stumbling into the ropes. Was it a slip or a knockdown? The ref called it a slip, and the arena erupted in boos. Replays showed Tank's glove brushing the canvas, and Twitter exploded. Half the fans swore Jake scored a legit knockdown, the rest said Tank slipped. Either way, the momentum shifted. Suddenly, Jake wasn't just surviving, he was threatening. Round 6 was pure madness. The ref kept breaking the final 30 seconds. Tank exploded with a blistering flurry, snapping Jake's head back twice with that lightning-fast left. The crowd's roar was deafening, the kind that rattles your chest. Halfway through the fight, nobody could believe what they were watching. Round 7 brought blood. Jake walked straight into a counter left that split his eyebrow open. Blood poured down his face, staining his white trunks. Tank's fans erupted, sensing the end, but Jake refused to back off. Round 8, and the pattern stayed the same. Tank landing clean, Jake absorbing it all. Then came the shocking realization. Jake Paul could take Tank Davis's best shots. Every time Tank landed flush, Jake staggered but never fell. His chin stunned even veteran analysts. This was no longer just a spectacle, it was heavyweight stalking a smaller man. Tank's speed remained, but his power had dulled after taking heavy body shots all night. It became a battle of will, Tank's knockout power versus Jake's size, heart, and stubbornness. The arena was electric. Every exchange drew roars, every punch felt like it could end it all. Round 10. Everything on the line. Both fighters dug deep, swinging with desperation. Jake's face was swollen and bloodied. Tank looked smaller but sharper, pouring every ounce of power into his shots. Every second felt like the fight could end, and then chaos. The finish was wild, dramatic, and unforgettable. Some say Tank landed the clean knockout punch that dropped Jake like a tree. Others argue the ref jumped in too early after a reckless exchange, waving it off as both men were throwing bombs. No matter controversy, power, and pure chaos. The kind of war that builds legends and fuels arguments for years. When the dust settled, or depending on your view, when the ref jumped in or Tank's punch closed the show, the reactions came pouring in like a tidal wave. First up was Logan Paul. If anyone was more fired up than the Miami crowd, it was him. Grabbing a mic backstage, he shouted, "That's my brother! That's the greatest fighter in the world!" It sounded over the top, but it came straight from the heart. Then came Mike Tyson's take, and in classic, "Jake did great. Now Logan, you're next." And that's where the fallout got interesting. Did Jake Paul finally prove he's more than just a gimmick?